Good morning, magical experimenters. I imagine you're wondering, why is Taylor doing a video right now? And the answer to that is because later this week I will be gone. So I will not be doing my video at the usual time because I'm going to be busy taking care of some family business. And also because, well, I happen to have the day off and figured, why not do a video at a different time of the day? And so in today's video, we're going to answer a question that was asked in the Magical Experiments group. The question was asked was, how much do our minds influence the process of our rituals? Interesting question. So I'm going to take an interesting perspective on this and share that I think that in a lot of modern magic, our minds influence the process of our magical rituals too much. And I'm going to argue that if anything, we need to back that off a bit. Now, let's first talk about how our minds influence the magical process. In a lot of modern magic, what you end up seeing is, I'd say, a fair amount of work done around visualizations, and there's also the approach to the tendency to treat magic as a psychological phenomenon, and other fun things like that I think contribute to this notion that ultimately tries to treat magic as a mental phenomenon and severely limits it as a result. And this is what I mean by why I don't think the mind is as significant as one might think. We in our culture, or at least in American culture, I should say, I shouldn't presume for anyone else, but in American culture, it seems to me that the mind is treated as kind of the prime aspect of a person, right? Like, how smart are you? How intelligent are you? How big is this brain up here? What can you do with your mind? And don't get me wrong, the mind is an amazing experience that we have access to. Our ability to think and our ability to process information and all of that is something that shouldn't be underestimated or dismissed out of hand. And that's not what I'm trying to do here. But I think that a lot of people get so caught up in this notion of the mind and the primacy of the mind that they ignore other aspects that are just as important and really need to be balanced holistically. And what are those aspects, you might say? Well, there are emotions, our feelings. There's the sensual awareness of our body, the kinesthetic aspects of it, the way our body grounds things. These are key aspects that are often ignored. And then of course there's intuition and other things that we might consider spiritual. I mean, I don't know if they are wholly spiritual or not. I mean, maybe they're just an essential part of the human experience that we happen to have. But either way, those things are often ignored or downplayed in favor of treating the mind as the kind of like the primal, the primacy of process. And I think that when we do that, we miss out on a significant aspect of magic, which is experiential embodiment. Now, I've talked about experiential embodiment before, but I'll give you a brief definition of it. I think of experiential embodiment as essentially this way of doing magical work where you're embodying it on all levels of your human experience. You're soaking in the experience and you're allowing it to transform your awareness of the magical work that you're doing, because it's not just something that's engaged up in here, but it's engaged in here and in the senses and everything else that comes with the package of being a human being. Now, why, you might wonder, do we put so much emphasis on the mind? And this really comes back to the fact that, like, in the 19th century and 20th century, there was this focus on the psychology, on psychology, and on understanding how the mind works. And it it became this thing that I think in a way kind of overtook a lot of magical work, particularly in the late 20th century, where, an attempt was really made to try and categorize magic on the basis of models, and to look at magic in terms of well, how is it impacting me on a mental level. The downfall of that is that it has diluted the occult discipline significantly, um, in many ways. Now, it hasn't done it for everyone. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't buy into it, thankfully. But for those people who do, I think that it really ends up ultimately detracting from the magical experience. The other aspect to it too is that I think that in a lot of ways it's also created this notion of trying to be of trying to of getting into a see it, I have to see it to believe it kind of mentality when it comes to magic. The other day I asked people on both Facebook group and on the Magical Experiments page, like, if I were to teach a class on magic, what would you like me to teach you about? And some of the answers that I got were very telling, because it was basically Hollywood magic is what they wanted. Like, one person said, I want to be able to turn people into toads. Okay. So you basically, of course there's fairy tales out there where things like that happen, but also it's what I label as Hollywood magic. It's not real magic. It's special effects magic. Another person was like, I want, this feeling goosebumps and tingles and all that isn't the real deal. I want the real deal. I want to be able to see a spirit in the flesh. I want to see, I want to see it. I want to experience it. Da, 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 da. Well, again, that's Hollywood magic. People want these experiences that are that I term as Hollywood magic. It's not real magic. It's magic that's based on the sensational. And this is, ironically enough, is a reflection of this focus on the mind. Because in a very real sense, what it really comes from is this notion of, I need to see it in order to believe it. I need to have proof that magic works. Well, the proof that magic works comes from our willingness to embrace the experience on all levels of our being, and to carefully observe what happens as a result of having those experiences. But when we're focused on the sensationalism of magic, and we're focused on it, on having it appear a certain way, what we're really doing is we're limiting and diluting the experience, because we want it to conform to our expectations of what we think magic ought to be. And I see this coming about in part as a result of this focus on the mind to the exclusion of everything else. Because in a very real sense, what's happening here is we're trying to intellectualize magic. We're trying to make it into something that we can categorize and objectify, and et cetera, et cetera. Some people will say, well, Taylor, don't you talk about the process of magic? Don't you talk about applying an analytical approach to magic? I mean, that's very mental, right? Well, in a very real sense, it is mental in some ways. But my approach at analysis and observation of magic, and looking at the principles and everything else, is still based on this notion that ultimately you need to rely upon the experience. The reason why I introduce an element of analysis into the work is because if you're going to have those experiences, you don't want to accept them wholesale without taking the time to really critically examine them and be able to parse out, what is actually happening here that is magical, and what is happening here that maybe I need to examine and qualify as coming from a different thing. What can I do to really analyze the effectiveness of the work that I'm doing? And really, the way that I approach this is that ultimately the practice of magic needs to be holistic in and of itself. We need to embrace the experience, but we also need to be willing to observe the experience. We need to balance wholesale acceptance with critical thinking, but we need to at the same time acknowledge that the experience should necessarily inform the critical thinking that we do about magic. It should inform the analysis that we do. And that if we leave out key components of the experience, then we're actually limiting our ability to observe and critically examine how magic is showing up in our lives. And so when people say, I want Hollywood magic, Taylor, I want to be able to see a demon and all this other stuff, I say, well, that's great. But what else, what are you, in your magical work, what are you actually doing to open yourself to the experience, to allow that experience in? Like if you're going to work with a spirit, what are you doing to actually connect with that spirit? And how is that spirit showing up? And what are you maybe dismissing or ignoring because you have this expectation of how something ought to be that is significantly impacting your magical work? And I don't think that many magicians really acknowledge that. I don't see that. I see kind of a tunnel vision approach to magic where people are so focused on their expectations of what magic ought to be. They're so focused on the Hollywood aspect of magic, and they're so focused on trying to limit magic in very specific ways, including, the mind, that they are missing out on the experience itself. Now, when I think about the role of the mind in magical work, I think of it in terms of a way of experiencing magic that allows us to conceptualize it, allows us to theorize, it allows us to develop ideas, it brings critical awareness, and these things are all important. And so I don't want to dismiss that out of hand. I want to make that very clear. But I want to balance it. And I would urge you to balance it. Well, one of the suggestions that I would have for any of you who are watching this video is that the next time you're doing a magical work, open yourself to the experience. Really let the experience in. And don't necessarily feel the need to critically examine it at the time. Just be open to the experience. Allow it to happen. And then afterwards, when you're done with the magical working, take the time to write out, well, what did I notice? What did I experience? And then pay attention to the after effects, the result, etc. What happens afterwards? Does this align with the magical work? It may not be as sensationalistic as you want it to be. It may not be Hollywood magic, but I find that when we really truly open ourselves to the experience and we embody it in our lives and we live it, that magic has a way of showing up in a manner that, yes, may seem very subtle, but nonetheless is very powerful in terms of the change that it brings into our lives. And that when we work with spirits, as an example, we may never ever physically see the spirit. That doesn't mean the spirit isn't at work in our lives. It means that we necessarily need to recognize and open ourselves to the experience itself and see how the spirit shows up. And some of that will necessarily occur through the faculty of the mind, but some of it's going to occur through other ways. Now, that may not be the answer that some of you want to hear or see or whatever else. But I will tell you that as a practitioner of magic, I call it as I see it. I know a lot of people like to spin sensationalistic tales as well of their magical work, and I've done my best not to do that. I try to be very factual about the magic and the way that it works in my life and how it shows up. And I'll admit, I'm often very skeptical of people who say, well, I saw this spirit appear. Okay, great. Did you really? Or is that just, and maybe they did. But a lot of times it seems to me that one of the aspects of the magical community is that we get so hyped up on trying to spin these sensationalistic stories. And of course, we play into the trap of Hollywood magic. We get so focused on that we're ignoring the real rich depth of experience we could be having because, well, we have to play up to these expectations. We have to be able to see spirits. We have to show that magic has a physical, tangible effect on the world. Well, magic does have a physical, tangible effect on the world, but it may not be the physical, tangible effect that you want it to have. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that you have to be willing to open yourself up to that effect. And that's something that, it actually can be pretty damn amazing. I mean, I've had some amazing experiences with magic where I've had, some very tangible effects, bringing a partner into my life, actually twice over, um, getting desired results that I needed to manifest, other things. Now, all of this is somewhat subtle in some ways. It's like, oh, there's no fireballs, no special effects crackling up. Doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means that the way magic shows up in our lives is different than what people necessarily want. People want the Hollywood magic. They want, they want to see the spirits. They want to have all these other things occur. And go for it if that's what you really want. But I would challenge you to examine why you want that. What is it you're really looking for? And then examine the role of the mind in that, and the and examine the cultural expectations that go into that. And discover for yourself whether any of that really makes sense. And and ask yourself the question, what in my focus on this, on Hollywood magic, on the role of the mind, what else am I missing out on? What am I not opening myself up to? And then try opening yourself up to the actual experience of magic. As I said before, the mind has a role in magical work. We just need to balance it. And right now, in modern day occultism, it's not balanced, in my opinion. There's something there that needs some work. Okay, so thanks for watching. That's the video for this week, earlier than expected, but hope you guys have a great week, and see you next week at some point.